I joked to the waiter saying he's in the friend zone and not my husband. He took it serious and stood up. I'm about to lose my mind from frustration as his silence and absence is slowly eating me up. I have nowhere else to turn to, and I had no choice but to come here on Reddit to let everything out. I need advice. I'm really desperate right now. I've been crying for days now, and it's been over a month since that day. The day I messed up and it cost me my happiness. How do you turn back time so you could escape from making that one mistake? A mistake that felt so right at that moment and was supposed to be an innocent joke. An innocent joke one could just laugh about and then move on from it the next moment. But then it turned out to be one that turned sweet memories to nightmares. If only I could take it back. If only I could, I'd reverse the night I referred to my marriage as being in the friend zone. I had said it as a joke, but then that one joke led to my dirty secrets being revealed one after another, and I am at the verge of losing everything. Every time I think about it, the fact that my cover was blown and everything came to light from just one joke still chokes me. I have been crying so much for days now as I spend my days in my lonely office and my night in my cold room, hoping everything would return to how it once was. My name is Betty. I'm 31 years old. I met my husband Mark when we both started out together as interns in the company we are currently working in. Mark was always a sweet person, so welcoming and very easy to get along with despite his introverted personality. He was so kind and very good looking. He always had this radiant smile on his face, one that could turn stressful work hours to an easy and bright day with just his presence. His soft personality made it easy for him to get along with everyone around him, and they all loved him too. He had a lot of admirers, as every lady in the company wanted to have a piece of him, which made me feel so high and special when he started taking interest in me. We started dating, and I felt so pleased with all the attention I was getting, as I could see ladies in our company burn from jealousy each time Mark sweetly took care of me, and it made me feel so good. Everything was rosy, and we had been so happy together. After completing our internship, we both got accepted officially to the company as permanent staff. During our team dinner, Mark had prepared a surprise proposal and had asked me to marry him. I knew he had to go out of his shell to do that considering his closed lifestyle, but because he knew I loved those kinds of things, he had to do it just so I could be happy. Mark loved me so much that I was confident I had him wrapped around my fingers. He always said yes to everything I wanted and was ready to give his all just so I could be comfortable. I guess that made me so comfortable that I had unknowingly started to put myself first before him and ended up taking his love for granted. I feel it all started the day we were called to the main office by our CEO. I and Mark had been the spotlight of the company, and the company had decided to promote one of us. We were to be graded by our performance at the end of the week and through the votes from our colleagues. Obviously, I knew I didn't stand a chance. I was good at my job, but when it came to my colleagues, I knew Mark was going to outshine me. I was fine with it, as Mark and I had agreed that it doesn't matter who ends up getting the promotion. Whoever wins for the both of us since we are one. I was happy just hearing his words, but then I started to think differently when I let my emotions get the best of me. I often heard the rest of our colleagues gossip about me and my husband secretly at each little chance they got. They kept talking about how undeserving I am of the position and saying I shouldn't even be Mark's rival, as he is by far on another level compared to me. They went on saying Mark should have been paired up with Diana, as she is a better candidate compared to me. Hearing Diana's name being mentioned got me riled up and upset, especially with the fact that I was well aware about her feelings for my husband. Diana has always had her eyes on Mark from day one, and she has been so persistent and resilient, although Mark never reciprocated her feelings and married me instead. Since then, everyone in the company had been so bitter about it and kept saying that Mark was too good for me and Diana was the better choice for him. Hearing them still place her above me and even comparing me to my husband made me so upset, and something in me changed, and this time I was determined to win. I desperately wanted to win that I sometimes caught myself getting jealous of my husband, and most times I'd purposely hide certain information just so I could be a step ahead of him with my performances. But none of that really mattered to Mark, as he always placed me first before anything. So giving up on the promotion that day was just so easy for him to do, as my happiness always came before his. My fearful thoughts came to reality as Mark had the highest vote and was chosen for the promotion on that day. But to everyone's surprise, including me, he gave up on the position and handed it over to me. I was just as shocked as everyone, but I was also the happiest in the building that day. Our CEO had prepared for a team dinner the next day to congratulate me on my promotion. I just couldn't wait to attend the gathering that night so I could show off and rub it to the faces of all those that gossiped so much behind my back, and also flaunt my husband's love for me to Diana's face so she could see one more time just how much I meant to Mark, and how impossible her wish to get Mark was going to be futile. On the day of the dinner that I anticipated so much, Mark had come down with a cold and had decided to go home as he couldn't join us for the team dinner anymore. Instead of feeling worried and going after my husband, I had shamelessly finished my work for the day and gone for the team dinner as nothing mattered to me other than that. Each time I think about that day, I feel ashamed of myself and I deeply regret it. But what's the point? What is done is done. And regretting it now cannot change the past, which is such a painful reality. I had partied so hard that night that I had lost track of time and had not noticed Mark's calls. After the gathering ended, I took out my phone to order a taxi, and that was when I saw all of Mark's missed calls and his message. His condition had gotten worse that he had to go to the hospital. Reading the message ignited a deep feeling of guilt in me that I hurried to the address of the hospital he had sent to me. When I got to the hospital, the guilt I was feeling was suddenly replaced by anger and jealousy as I saw Diana there. She was already so busy looking after Mark, and it upset me so much to see her doing all that. I immediately approached them, and instead of asking my husband about his condition or speaking to his doctor to know what went wrong, instead I picked a fight with Diana, and we both ended up being kicked out of the hospital, embarrassing ourselves. At least one would feel embarrassed after that, but I wasn't. Instead, I was so angry with my husband that I had refused to visit him for the remaining 2 days he spent in the hospital before getting discharged. I had returned from work that day, and Mark had prepared a surprise dinner for me. He had cooked my favorite food and bought me flowers, and the moment I got home, he got on one knee and apologized for the incident that happened in the hospital. No. He explained to me that he had no idea that Diana would follow him when he got off from work. She claimed she had noticed his condition, and she wanted to be certain he was okay. She had offered to give him a ride home since I was not available, and he had no choice as he wasn't in the condition to refuse. He had barely gotten home when his condition worsened, and since she was the only one around at the moment, she had taken him to the hospital. He apologized and promised me nothing like that was ever going to happen again. We had dinner together that night and even made love after. Months after that, Mark started to express his need and wish for us to start a family together. He wanted us to start having kids, and I still remember the level of happiness that dazzled in his eyes that day when we talked about it, and any woman or wife would definitely want to fulfill such a wish for her husband. He said he is always going to be there for me, and he was willing to support me and our child if I ever felt the load was too much for me. I had someone this sweet. Now I ask myself, why was I so blinded to have realized it? What do I do now that I'm about to lose everything? My boss had called for me that day and offered me a big contract. Our company had been planning for an expansion into the global market, and we had just found foreign investors to make that happen for us. The project was handed to me, and I had to do everything possible to make sure the client seals the deal. I started coming home late from work, and I was so busy that I hardly had time for my husband anymore, but Mark tried to be understanding. Most times he would always wait up with me at work and assist me until I'm done, and most times he would prepare dinner and wait at home until I returned. I would most times refuse to eat even after he had put in so much effort, claiming I was exhausted, and sometimes I'd tell him I had eaten dinner already with my boss, and without realizing it, I had started drifting away from my husband. One of the moments I regret the most was the day I embarrassed my husband in front of everyone in the company. Mark was supposed to give a presentation to our client that day, but he had suddenly vanished an hour to the time for the presentation. I was left in a tight spot as the head and leader of the project, and the clients left so disappointed that day, leaving me in a tough spot. My husband later returned, but I had exploded at him that day, saying so many hurtful things to him. I even went as far as saying he was just jealous of me, and that's why he wasn't happy about my success, and he is now trying to bring me down. How could I have said all those things to him? This is the same person that gave up on his promotion for me to get to where I am now. Looking back, I loathe myself so much for that. Just as always, my husband still apologized and tried to make up with me. He even made up for his absence at the meeting by giving an appealing presentation on the day the meeting was rescheduled, which made our foreign investors pleased as they kept praising me nonstop about it. And that was how I warmed up to my husband again, but still, that didn't change me. I became a workaholic, and it got to a point that I'd only come home in the morning, take a shower, and then return to the office again. That day, my husband was so concerned that it turned to him being upset about me overstressing myself. He didn't like me suffering, and he felt that the job was wearing me out. So he asked if he should talk to our boss about it, and I said no. And he told me that if I ever felt overwhelmed, like the job was too much for me, that I am free to express myself to him, and that he would understand. And even if I wanted to quit, and he would support me, and he was willing to take care of me. He said that because I was always overstressed and complaining each time I returned from work. But instead of acknowledging his kind words, I would always get angry, saying nothing mattered to me other than that contract. And if he really loved me like he claimed, he would support me. I would always avoid discussing the topic of having a baby each time he tried to bring it up, as I could not afford to get pregnant just when I was at the peak of exploring my career, and I was too blinded to even realize how much Mark was hurting. To make things worse, I had secretly started sleeping with the foreign investors just so I could get the deal. It happened after I overheard Diana and her clique talking. They said they were sure the deal with the foreign investor was going to fall through, and they had heard rumors of our rival company making an attempt to seal the deal with them first, and that I do not stand a chance. They went on saying I deserved it for acting all high and mighty and even treating my husband the way I did. Their words had barely sunk in when I got a call from the investor saying he had seen a better company to place his money in, and he wanted to pull out. I felt like a knife had cut through me, and coupled with the words of Diana, I couldn't imagine the level of shame and embarrassment I'd have to face if it really came to reality. I pleaded and tried to make him stay, and he had suggested we meet up and talk about it, and that was how one meeting turned into a sin I had done not considering how much it was going to hurt my husband. Every time I look back, I wonder how important I thought that deal was to do something like that, and if things would have turned out differently if I had just stopped then. If I had not bothered about what people would say or think, would things have been different for me? In hindsight, I should have stopped. It wasn't worth it. I don't know why I had to do what I did. I met with the foreign investor, and after much argument and pleading, he finally asked me to prove just how much this deal meant to me. I told him I'd be willing to do anything to see that this deal pushed through, as I am betting everything on it. After hearing my statement, he started making advances towards me, touching my thighs and making seductive moves at me. I wanted to refuse, but then I knew if I did that, I'd be kissing goodbye to the contract, and that alone scared me. I could already picture Diana's and the rest of my colleagues laughing and rubbing my failure to my face, and the mere thought of it was so embarrassing to bear. Driven by my foolish pride, I succumbed to the temptation, and that's how I slept with my client. If I had stopped there, maybe I would have earned forgiveness from fate, but then I continued. I experienced a different kind of pleasure with my client, one that I hardly felt with my husband Mark. Unlike Mark, who felt our home was happiness and all he could ever ask for, my client's vibe matched mine, as he was the type who loved to have fun and explore. The time we made love was one of the best experiences of my life, as I often found myself waiting and calling for him. I started to find my husband boring, as even our intimate moment together no longer felt exciting to me. Just like that, I started meeting up more often with my client, and before I knew it, I had completely turned something so shameful into something pleasurable. Most times when I get home after my meeting with my client, I'd feel so guilty, especially seeing how much Mark kept trying for the both of us. At some point, I started to feel sorry for him, but I just couldn't stop. Finally, the deal got approved just as I had wanted. Our team had decided to get together and celebrate, but my husband suggested we both eat out together alone. He said he missed our moments together, and since the deal was finally over, we should both try to rekindle our relationship once more. Hearing that, I immediately canceled my meeting with my client for that day, and also canceled the team dinner and joined my husband. We had finished having dinner and decided to have a few more drinks together before going home. My husband had just gone to the restroom when I got a text from my client. Before I knew what happened, I was smiling like an idiot and texting back that I had completely forgotten I was on a date with my husband. As fate would have it, I didn't realize a waiter had been observing us. When he came to serve our drinks, he smiled and complimented us and stated that my husband is really sweet and good-looking, and it's clear how happy I am and that I am lucky to have him. My husband had just returned from the restroom, and as he sat down, I jokingly said to the waiter, "He's not my husband. We're in the friend zone." To my surprise, my husband took it seriously. His smile disappeared, and without a word, he stood up and left, leaving me stunned. The waiter, who had just been trying to be friendly, seemed equally confused. I was confused and surprised about his sudden reaction that I went after him, but he had left with our car already. I took a taxi and went after him, and when I got home, he was in the living room with a small luggage. I was confused for a moment when I rushed to him and tried to explain to him that I didn't mean what I said, and it was just a harmless joke. and just then he took out a pink pack that I do keep my supplements. Seeing the bag in his hands, I almost passed out. Without giving me a chance to say anything, he furiously turned everything in the pack out, and just then my sin was staring at me. I had left the contraceptive pills I was taking in there. My lips started shaking as I could not find my voice to say anything. The next thing he said was if the pills are also a joke too. He asked me if I hated the fact of having his kids that much that I had to dwell on contraceptives. He had called the clinic I had been receiving the drugs from, and I had been taking them since the time he brought up his interest of starting a family with me. He asked if I hated him that much and didn't consider him a husband to the point of not wanting to have kids with him, and that if I was disgusted with the idea, I should have just told him about it. How do I explain to my husband that I have been sleeping with someone else, and I had taken the pills to prevent myself from getting pregnant so I could never get caught? I tried pleading, but he didn't spare me a second look and stormed out of the house. I have not set my eyes on my husband since that night. He had taken a leave from work and had ghosted me since then. Diana had also taken a leave, and the thought of them being together is about to make me lose my mind. How do I amend this? How do I tell my husband the pills were not because of him? Explaining the truth surrounding the pills will surely bring out the truth about my disgusting affair. I've not been able to focus on anything as I'm scared the truth would come to light any time, and the anxiety is killing me. I miss my husband so much, and I sincerely love him. I don't want to lose my husband in our marriage. Please, I need help and advice. What do I do? Update. It's true when they say that people only know the value of what they have, when they have finally lose it, and Mark's absence in my life has made me realize the true meaning to those words. How do you make amends for hurting the one person that meant the world and more to you? Is there still a possibility that things could return to the way it used to be? Why did things have to get to this before I could finally realize how broken things were between us? I had been indirectly hurting the one person that was real in my life. Mark finally showed up after ghosting me for more than a month. He refused to tell me where he had been, as he had been giving me silent treatment, and refused to even look at me. I can't even bring myself to ask him anything. I desperately wanted to know where he had been and if he was with Diana, but then he has refused to spend even a second in the same place with me, which is so frustrating. I try to approach him, but the Mark that returned after a month is a completely different person, as he had started to act differently. Mark wasn't a party type as such. He always refused joining team dinners and preferred to eat at home. But ever since Mark got back, he started clubbing with his friends and would always join our colleagues at work for team dinners and birthday parties. Just mention anything you wanted to celebrate, and Mark was ready to join. He became so distant from me, and he had refused to sleep in the same room with me and has been sleeping in the room he had prepared for our child if ever we had one. Seeing him act this way breaks my heart so much. How could someone change this much? Is it even possible for me to have my old husband back? I had complained to my mom about it, and she blamed me so much, and she claimed that everything was my fault and that she admired Mark so much for being so patient for that long. She even went on telling me that the day I had lashed out on him because he missed the company meeting was because of her. She had been rushed to the hospital after she collapsed due to her high blood pressure, and no one could reach me, and they had no choice but to call my husband. He had responded and hurried down there in no time, and he stayed by her side until she woke up and only left when he was certain she was fine. He had stopped her from telling me about it, claiming he didn't want to add to my worries. And I had a lot going on at work even when I had misunderstood him and ignored him for days. He claimed it was his fault and he was going to make it up to me. I broke down in tears after hearing my mom's words. I felt terrible for cheating and hurting him. I hurried home to talk to Mark. I was ready to do everything to make up with my husband, even if I had to force him to talk to me. The Mark I knew would never be mad at me forever, and he was always weak when it came to me. I was willing to make him happy and make up for everything I had done, but my wishes and plans had shattered even before I could do anything. I hurried home and prepared our favorite food for dinner, waiting for him to come home. When Mark returned, I rushed to hug him, but he rejected me. My husband had not said a word to me for a month now, and that night the first word that came out of his mouth was, "Let's get divorced." I was so stunned when I heard those words from him, but before I could react, he had placed the divorce papers on the table along with pictures of me and the foreign investors in bed together. The same table I had decorated just so we could start our marriage all over again. I felt so weak on my feet that I had sunk to the floor as the pictures in front of me squeezed all the strength I had left in me. I started crying and begging Mark. I begged him to forgive me, claiming it was a mistake and I regretted it so much, but Mark wouldn't listen. He was furious. He started yelling and asking me if the contract meant that much to me that I had willingly chosen to jeopardize our marriage. He asked if I had for once considered how much of a damage this might cause to our marriage and myself. He said he was an idiot, and looking back at everything, he realized he was even a bigger idiot for trusting and loving someone so selfish like me. He spelt out how much of an embarrassment I was to him, and he hated himself for ever loving someone like me. I cried so hard, begging and rolling on the floor, but the more I begged, the more furious he got. He sent all the food I had prepared flying and breaking things, the more I wailed. I had never seen Mark that way. He threatened to hurt me if I did not sign the divorce papers that instant. I kept begging, but Mark was harder than a rock. He was red with anger that I was so scared, and I immediately signed the divorce papers. He threw my stuff out of the house and swore to hurt me if he ever saw me again. And just like that, Mark shut me out of his life. Rumors about my infidelity went around the company, and the fact that I got the deal by sleeping with the investor was everyone's topic to discuss. The company had to let me go, as keeping me would bring more damage to their company name. Diana walked up to me the day I got fired and told me I should have been more careful if I wanted to remain Mark's wife. She told me she hated me so much for hurting someone like him. She confessed that no matter how much she tried, Mark had never seen her more than a friend. She even went as far as following him when he went on the leave, but Mark had treated her even worse than a stranger, claiming he loved me so much and he doesn't want to hurt me. He only needed some time alone, and he was going to go back to me once he had cooled off. She confessed that hearing him say that made her so upset that he was so in love with someone like me, and that I didn't deserve him, as she was aware I was cheating on him. She knew telling him would hurt him, but when he rejected her and left to return to me, she just couldn't hold it any longer, and had to send him the beautiful photos. She concluded by saying if she couldn't have Mark, then she would make sure I as well do not have him. And from the start, I did not deserve someone so precious like Mark. I broke down in tears after hearing all that, and she just left me there.
Hey.
Mark had accepted a promotion and was transferred to work in the company's branch abroad. He had bid his goodbye to my mom, and that was the last I heard of him. I have lived my life since then in regret, as crying has not changed anything for me. I had received a lot of hate and a lot of people pointing fingers at me, saying a lot of bad things about me. I know I messed up, and I have no excuse for it. I wish Mark all the best in life, and I hope he could move on and forget about someone like me. This is going to be my last update. I will live the rest of my colorless life paying for what I did to Mark, as I know I do not even deserve to be happy. I sometimes find myself wishing everything could become a dream, and when I wake up, Mark would be smiling beside me, but then it's never happening. If fate would allow, I would love to meet Mark again, even if I have to watch him from afar. Now I have nothing but regrets left. I keep praying for a second chance. If it were possible, I'd like to make up for everything I did to Mark. Even if I know I can't undo what I did, I'd still want to apologize. Now all I can do is wish and hope that day that comes would shine a glimpse of light in the darkness I am stuck in, as my life has reached its end.